The project scope blitz is something that we talked about at the very, very beginning of this course, and I said we're going to get to it a little bit later. But I also said that it's the very first thing that you do on the project. Once you have basic project information and you kick it off, the whole idea behind this was that we first get everything else in context, and then we'll talk about what you're actually doing first. The project scope blitz is something you're going to do on the very first day of meeting with your clients, your subject matter experts, and anybody else who's interested in the project. It's going to take you about half a day to do this scope blitz for your project. In most cases, in a few cases it'll take a little bit longer than that, but in most cases it takes about half a day. The whole idea of the project scope blitz is to be able to identify as quickly as possible as many of the business events that are part of the system, the project you're working on, up front. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can foretell the future. I'm not suggesting that you can get a bunch of people in the room and say, so what would you like in your system? If you'll recall, early on I said you never asked them that question because they're looking at you very strangely, thinking that you're supposed to figure that out. But there is a way of being able to get information out from them. When we're talking about essential business events, rather than how things are going to be done, we can get a pretty darn good list right up front of the business events. So your objective is to be able to get that list, and then once you have a fairly robust list, you can then estimate the time that's required to do the analysis. And I'm going to tell you about how long it takes in just a few minutes. And you can set priorities in terms of which events you're going to deal with first, which ones you're going to deal with last, and so on. And finally, you can work with those events and the people who have the knowledge specific to an event to create full-blown discovery sessions. And a discovery session is when you have the right people in the room with you, whether that be one person or 21 people, it doesn't much matter, and you go through this process of developing the business process to support the event. Find the objects and the data, write the narrative, do the business rules tables, as you can ask questions about, and you do that for all of the events. So you can see here on this table, this business rules, or this event table, that as you ask them questions about potential events, you start listing them. And the average project will probably have about 25 of those. And I'm not saying it will always be 25. You know, it could be 12, it could be 52. Once you get over 50, you're talking about a pretty big project at that point. But you identify for each event the different business units or departments or business areas that are involved with each of these events. Here we have a customer buys a product. Who's involved in dealing with a customer buys a product? And only about buying the product, not about any of the other things here, product being returned or determining the salesperson's commissions or anything like that. But who has ownership of that, if you like? And in this example, we've said a customer buys a product. Well, certainly sales would be involved in that, marketing would be involved, and accounting is involved, but purchasing is not. That's just in our example. So we would check these off in terms of when we do the discovery session for a customer buys a product, we're going to invite the experts from sales, from marketing, and from accounting, but not from purchasing, to get into the room to do the discovery session with us. And each department or each business area may send one person or two or three people, whatever they choose, whatever the managers in those areas feel would be appropriate. We can also determine the priority by simply asking our clients, what's the priority here? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, if you ask the client, what's the priority? You know, priority 1 meaning now, priority 2 meaning next budget cycle, priority 3 meaning it's a nice to have, so when we get to it. Okay? And you might be saying, well, if I ask my client, they're going to say priority 1, naturally, right? Well, the interesting thing is that we found that if you have the right people in the room, if you have the senior people in the room, they will give you the real priority, whether it be 1, 2, or 3, in the example that I gave you. They do tend to tell you what the real priority is, as long as you have the right people in the room. So you can determine the priority, which means you can plan the work as well. You can also schedule the time that you need to be able to do those discovery sessions. And how long does it take to do a discovery session? Well, as we're going to see a little bit later on, it takes 1 hour with your subject matter experts to do one event on average. Now that's based on about 850 projects in terms of the metric coming back. But you have to do an additional 3 hours of finishing work offline. So 1 hour per event with your subject matter expert and your clients. An additional 3 hours for the analysts who are doing the work. So that way, if you have 10 events, you know that it's going to take 10 hours with your subject matter experts, 1 hour at a time. And it's going to take an additional 30 hours of finishing work to make sure that all the dots are connected, T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and so forth. So you know exactly how long it's going to take. One of the questions that your boss is going to have is, how much time do we need for analysis? And you're able to tell them after this half day or 1 day project scope blitz, you're able to say, it's going to take us in real time X number of hours. But it's only 1 hour at a time. Of your subject matter experts that you have to get into the room with you, everybody's got an hour somewhere. But very few people have a day at a time. You have to schedule, help them rearrange their vacation time and everything else. So it's a lot easier when you can do it 1 hour at a time. Now, the first time you do this project scope blitz, all things are difficult the very first time. So one of the things that we're going to give you as part of this course is a list of all the events in the universe. Not all in the universe, but all the ones that we have. And we have over 4,000 events that are categorized and classified by industry and sector that you'll be able to have. So on a project, the way you can start is by looking at that list of events that we'll give you and say, how many of these fit my project? And copy those out. And then as you go through this project scope blitz, you can ask questions about some of the events that you've found on our list and say, is this the kind of thing that we need to be able to keep track of? Is this the kind of thing that we need to be able to deal with? And their answers will either be, no, we don't need that. Or they'll be, well, yeah. Or they'll say, well, not exactly, but they'll change the wording a little bit in terms of their understanding of what you've said. So that list is going to be powerful for you to use. And the first time you do this, I recommend very strongly that you use that list to get you started. And there's something for literally every business, every organization in that list of 4,000 or so events. After you've done that a couple of times yourself, you're going to find that you won't need to rely on that list very much at all. But it's a good checkpoint anyway. And you'll find that it's very easy to ask, stay focused on what they need, not how it's done. Having said that, people will always tell you about the problems they have with existing systems. All you do is be very empathetic and nod your head and say, yes, I understand. And you might even run a parking lot list for their problems and make notes about all these issues that they bring up, because they will. Because when they see it go up there, they see what you hear, and that's really important in terms of establishing the relationship that you need to establish with your clients and subject matter experts. They'll also tell you about how things are done today and how difficult that is. And again, be very empathetic. Nod your head and say, I do understand. And again, you can run that parking lot list if you wish. But always bring them back to, what do you need to be able to keep track of, to deal with? What situations do you encounter that we have to include in this project? What circumstances do we encounter that we have to deal with in this project? What things change that we have to look for in this project? And just keep them really focused on that. And by doing that, you're going to get everything you need. Don't spend time on all their problems, all their issues, but be empathetic and listen, but then go on and ask the questions about what do we need. So if somebody says, well, I have this problem with the current system, say, great, I understand. Make a note of it, put it on one of these Klingon sheets, it becomes very visible, and say, so what do you need to know to be able to deal with that problem? Well, they'll probably try to tell you how to do it, but don't pay too much attention to that, because that's a solution architecture thing. And distill from what they say what the situation, condition, circumstance, or event would be. And when you do that, it'll be no problem at all. Half a day later or a day later, you will have your list and you can do your planning for your discovery sections, your detailed discovery section. 1 hour for each one, and you've identified who's involved in each one. Now you can do that, or you can have everybody come in and do all your events, starting first in the morning, going through the entire day. And we find that some organizations really like to do that. They like to have this complete immersion approach, whereas other organizations see that as being too busy, too stressful, too difficult, because your subject matter experts, your clients, they have their own jobs to do too. And they don't want to be away from that for several days. So they find it easier to schedule an hour at a time here and there. And it's a really, really good way of doing it. Very, very productive, and it keeps people really happy. If you do that, you're going to have a really, really good list. Now, having said that, will you have a complete list? The answer is no. You will not have a complete list. But during the detailed discovery sessions, you're going to find the things you haven't found when you've done this project scope blitz. If we look over here again, you'll remember that we have, when we find the need for data, somebody's going to say, I need this piece of data, or we need this kind of object, like salesperson and so forth. And we can ask the exclusion and inclusion questions, and that'll help us find events that we may not yet have found. Also, in the business rules table, every time we get an answer that says never, that we never do something, that means you have to ask under what circumstance would that be true. And the circumstance, remember, is really an event. And we'll find all the events. So by doing that, project scope blitz first, exclusion and inclusion questions, business rules table. Once you've done all that, you've found all the events, all the circumstances, conditions, and situations that you have to deal with in your project. And once you've done that, you've found it all. So by the time you're done, because it is recursive, the whole thing is recursive in small pieces, by the time you're done, you've found it all. There are no other questions to ask about what is required at that point. Only the elusive and somewhat complicated, well, how do we do it, which is another story altogether.